This podcast is brought to you by the Albany Public Library main branch and the generosity of listeners like you. What is a podcast? God, Daddy, these people talk as much as you do. Razib Khan's Unsupervised Learning.
Thanks for listening to the ungated version of the Unsupervised Learning podcast. If you want to read some essays on some of these topics, please check out razib.substack.com. Again, that's razib.substack.com. Thank you.
Hey everybody, this is Razib with Unsupervised Learning, and on this holiday season, so I try to keep the podcast evergreen, but I'm going to talk about the holidays and Christmas today, so I'm just going to say, the holiday season, it's the Christmas season. I'm here with my friend Shadi Hamid. I've talked to Shadi on other podcasts and in real life before and on the internet. He is a scholar at Brookings, and he is a writer of several books on the Middle East and political science and foreign affairs. And his most recent book is The Problem of Democracy, which is about the Middle East and kind of about not the Middle East, including America. He also has a podcast with Demir M. I'm sorry, I'm just not the greatest with foreign names. Okay,
He's
yeah.
Croatian.
Anyway,
You don't like Croatians, apparently.
No, I'm down with Croatians. Croatians were a Sarmatian tribe. So they were Indo-Iranian originally. They were Slavocide, yeah. Croatians and Serbs. But in any case, so yeah, he's got wisdom of crowds. So, Shadi's all over the place. He does a lot of different things, has a lot of different opinions in a lot of different venues, I guess is what I would say. But let me just start out, say Assalamu alaikum and Merry Christmas. Unlike many, Shadi and I have talked about this, unlike many elite progressives, he is religious and not just there are some people who are progressives who would say I am a person of faith, but they don't really talk about their religion. I mean, they're Episcopalian, but it's not like they're going to talk about their relationship to Jesus Christ or anything like that. You're Muslim. I think you're a Sunni Muslim. I wouldn't consider you like incredibly religious or a fundamentalist, but it's not I don't know, it's not like you're a cultural Muslim. Okay, like you're a Muslim, you have religious views, you're pretty straight up about it. And right now we are in the Christmas season. So as a lot of the listeners might know, I was raised Muslim. So my parents have lived in this country since 1980. And over the last 40 years, they've gradually become, I'll say, pro-Christian or pro-Christmas. Originally, for me, Christmas was just watching specials and having vacations as a little kid. And then somehow, by the time I was an adult, I come home and my youngest siblings have a big Christmas tree in the living room, and they're doing presents, and one after the other, like all of the holiday traditions kind of came together. But over the 40 years that I've been alive, the country has also become much more secular and less Christian. So it's kind of this weird situation where we are a country with majority Christians, but it's much less explicitly Christian, especially in the cultural elites and the progressive left. But in general, like, even on the right, I can see kind of de-Christianization happening, the weakness of the Christian right vis-a-vis other parts of the right-wing coalition. The nationalist, secular nationalist, is actually pretty palpable over the last 10 years. But, we're in that time of the season, and you're a Muslim, you believe Jesus Christ is a prophet. A lot of, I don't want to say a lot of people, but I think many people do not know that Jesus Christ is a big deal in Islam. Yes, he's a prophet, but he's not a marginal prophet. I think he was the last major prophet before Muhammad, the seal of prophets. And so how do you, as a Muslim, as a believer in the religious role, the prophetic role of Jesus Christ, how do you view the Christmas season and the holidays and how it brings people together? Like, how are you feeling as someone who is not a Christian, but I definitely wouldn't call you unsympathetic to aspects of Christianity?
Okay, so Razib, first of all, thanks for having me. There's a lot there. So yeah, you're right. I'm not a cultural Muslim. I don't love the idea of Islam being just a cultural affinity. I think religions matter because they reflect theological convictions. Also, the idea of like an atheist Muslim seems a little bit odd to me, although perhaps you know some of them. But like at some basic level, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. As you know, it's interesting that you say that I'm religious because I wonder what that means. Like, what does it really mean when we say someone is religious? Does it mean simply that they believe in the creedal requirements of a faith, or does it mean they're observant to a certain degree and they kind of meet a threshold of, presumably an arbitrary threshold of observance or good practice? Those are just interesting questions. I'm not, just something, for us to ponder.
I mean, it
You know,
depends. It depends on what your religion is. If you're a lot of American Protestants do not understand orthopraxy. They don't understand
yeah.
adherence to Sharia or halakha or these ritual requirements in many religions of the world that define the religion. They think it's just a set of beliefs, of propositions, which it isn't for most people. So I think that's a confusion.
Yeah, that's helpful to say because I was just reading William Kavanaugh's The Myth of Religious Violence the other day, and he has this great quote, something like the separation of religion and politics is one of the inventions of the modern West. Oh yeah, you commented on that, I think. You quote tweeted
Yeah.
that. Yes,
I, I
exactly.
I would specifically say Calvinist Protestantism, radical Protestantism, but yes.
Yeah, yeah. So, it's interesting, like this, it's very much a modern idea that religion is interior, that it's something you do at home and it's privatized, it's in your soul, it's a question of belief. And then we almost separate that from the kind of public, legal, communal aspects. I mean, it is important for people to understand that that is, in some sense, a radical and innovative idea. Putting aside whether we think it's good or bad, it's just good to recognize that it's different than how many people still understand religion today. Even the word religion itself is in a very literal sense a modern construct. But on your question about how I feel about the holidays, I guess I'm pro-Christian too, like insofar as I don't love the fact that America is de-Christianizing. I don't think that's good for America. So I find myself in this kind of odd position of definitely being Muslim, but also wanting there to be more Christianity in public life in America. Because it's not really like a feasible scenario to have a lot more Islam in public life because, well, there's only 1% of us. So if we want to see more religion because we think religion can be positive for society, then it would have to be Christianity in this particular case. So yeah, I don't love I don't love the idea of secularization, and we can talk about why it hasn't worked out so well. But I also don't like it when, I mean, happy holidays to me, I'm fine. Like I don't really feel strongly about how to call certain things. If people are more comfortable just saying a generic happy holidays, more power to them. But I don't. What bothers me is if people think they have to dilute their own conviction. And if they see me as Shadi, a Muslim, and they think to themselves, oh, let me actually change what I would have otherwise have said to make Shadi feel more comfortable. That is not good to me. I don't want anyone to do that around me. I don't want anyone to change who they are. If they are merry about the fact that it's Christmas, they should say Merry Christmas.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think we're probably on the same page about this at this point. I've had different positions and views when I was younger, and just to reiterate for the audience, for the non-Americans out there, I just like double checked. So when Shadi and I were youths in the 20th century, very young, let's say like in the 1980s, 1990s, that sort of period, 85% of Americans said 80 to 85% said they were Christian. Okay, today the number is closer to like probably 60 to 65%. And most of that collapse is more liberal than not, but not exclusive, and the young people in particular. So a minority of Zoomers are Christian in America. So we've seen a massive secularization. We're not as secular as Sweden or England, a lot of European countries, but the distance between where we are now and where we were 40 years ago is massive. Bernie Sanders ran for president in 2016 and 2020, obviously, as well. But there was some inquiry about his religious views, but it's pretty clear that Bernie Sanders is not. I mean, maybe he believes in God, but he is a secular Jew. That would be a major issue if he had run in the 20th century, in my opinion. He would have had to
Yeah.
avow stronger theistic beliefs. Donald J. Trump, I'm not gonna try to read his mind, but he's arguably one of the most, probably like really in his life, probably in his worldview, one of the most worldly secular presidents we've had of late. Probably before him, Obama was one of the more secular ones, a man who, in his biography, said he believes in evolution more than angels, despite being an ostensible adult convert to Christianity. This is a big change from George W. Bush or even Bill Clinton, who, whether you think he's sincere or not, he could speak the language and he did avow belief in the Baptist church and the Baptist religion. Hillary Clinton was famously like a kind of an exemplar of mainline Protestant Methodism in the United States, and she is, from everything that I've heard, a pretty sincerely religious person. So we've had a sea change in this country towards secularity, towards kind of a decline in sectarianism. And I understand why people say happy holidays to include people, but it includes people through thinning our culture in a way, by making it less specific, less concrete. I'm going to say even almost less sincere, because Christmas is a big deal for Christians for a reason. Now, it's not only a Christian holiday. It famously, and I don't want to overdo this, but it famously integrated many aspects of Northern European broader religious and secular culture that were pre-Christian or a-Christian, right? So famously, it's around the same time as Natale Sol Invictus, the birthday of the invincible sun in the Roman world, and obviously Tool and all these midwinter solstices, they exist for a cultural reason. In terms of religion overall, I am an atheist. Shadi knows, and I've always been an atheist. But I do have to say, we've done the experiment of secularization to see if it would create a utopia that the new atheists were proposing in the second half of the aughts, and it didn't work out. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
Definitely didn't work out for those of us, like, let's say, that believe in kind of liberal or classical liberal values. Okay. The decline of religion did not lead to a flourishing of free thought, independent thought, nonconformity. In fact, it's probably like the South Park episode where everyone's free to conform to nonconformity or something. I don't know. I'm just saying concretely here, if you're into social justice, you're progressive. To some extent, there is a uniform. Just like Southern Baptists had a particular kind of like look and aesthetic in the 2000s and the aughts. A certain type of dress or a certain type of shirt, haircut. Well, I mean, if you're into social justice, it's not always true, but there's certain hair colors that are atypical, certain type of piercings, certain type of clothing. People need fellowship. They need some sort of tribal affinity. And with the decline of religion, with the decline of churches, a lot of people seem to believe, and I pretty much agree with them, some of their passions have been channeled in other novel ways. I will end by saying I have a friend. I'm not going to say who it is, but he's a prominent podcaster and intellectual. He said that a lot of these people, they should just be in the Methodist Church on Sundays. And he's talking
Yeah.
about some of the cultural social radicals that are, and he himself is a moderate Democrat, pretty conventional Democrat, but he thinks that a lot of people, they need to channel their social justice energies through a more controlled institution like the church that kind of mediates them and tempers them. And I think that's what he was getting at there.
Well, I think it was James Wood who said that he called wokeness post-Protestant neo-paganism, if I recall. And I like that formulation because it suggests that in some ways it's a natural outgrowth of Christianity. But I think that, so yeah, Jesus is important to Christmas. And I think that's something that I, as a Muslim, would want to honor. And I would want to take that seriously. I wouldn't want to look at Christmas as a secular holiday. that is just about bringing people together. I mean, so when people ask me, do I celebrate Christmas? I guess it depends what you mean by celebrate. I mean, we usually have some sort of, I guess, Christmas dinner. Sometimes we go to we used to at least go to family friends and exchange gifts. And, there's no theological value attached to that. It's just a way of joining in. It's part of the national culture, or at least it used to be. And that's a good thing. And I think that Americans shouldn't feel weird about recognizing that a large number of Americans were Christians, still are, and this is important to them. And there's no reason that we can't take part and recognize how important this day is to them. But of course, as a Muslim, as you said, Razib, we do take Jesus pretty seriously, but as a prophet. And maybe I don't actually know to what extent ordinary Christians or ordinary listeners of unsupervised learning would be aware of that. But yeah, it is. I guess worth emphasizing. We like Jesus a lot. We just don't think that he's divine. We don't think that he's the Son of God. And Muslims have always had a particular issue with the Trinity, which we don't really need to get into. But I think that living in a pluralistic society means that you don't ask your fellow Americans to dilute their faith, to dilute their own convictions. And that's why I'm generally against assimilation. I don't think assimilation is a good way of thinking about difference, because it does lead to conformity. And I don't want Muslims in America to give up who they are or feel pressure to give up who they are or to transform themselves into something more palatable as part of the mainstream culture. And that's one reason I've always been very critical of the French approach to secularism, because essentially French secularism asks French Muslims to make a choice between their French identity and their Muslim identity. Is, for at least for people who are practicing and observant, and especially women who choose to wear the headscarf. I mean, that to me is an untenable choice. Like, do you really want to ask your fellow citizens to make a choice like that? Can that possibly be good? I don't think it can. Also, I do wonder though, Razib,
Yeah.
you did make a really interesting reference to the notion that Obama was an ostensible adult convert to Christianity, which did make me chuckle a little bit, because I don't know if you're suggesting that he used to be Muslim, but we don't have to get into that. But hey, what do we
Hmm.
know? First
I
Muslim
yeah, I
president.
no,
There you
I
go.
don't I wasn't suggesting that. Well, I
I'm
mean,
joking.
so
I'm
he was
joking.
raised by a kind of a secular Muslim guy. I wasn't suggesting that. It's just I take people at their word. They can say whatever they want about their religion. I just don't get a sense that Obama is a very religious person, and he became president of the United States with many talents. But I think he's not stupid. He knows Paris is worth a mass, and
Yeah.
to be president of the United States with a name like Barack Hussein Obama, you best be a Christian.
Yeah. Yeah. It was like almost like he was overcompensating. Like, yeah, he
Yeah.
had to kind of go out of his way, but he was also quite fluent in the vocabulary of Christianity for someone who, I agree with you, who probably wasn't in his own personal life that religious or observant. He did seem surprisingly fluent in
Mhm.
Christian language, right?
Well, so I mean, yeah, I mean his his lineage, as some people point out, on his mother's side, he's pretty much mostly Yankee, Yankee, Kansas, but originally New England. He had he had, was it grandfather who was like had Emerson in his name, and then he assimilated to Black American culture, and Black American culture is a Christian culture, whether it's officially Christian or not. It is a religion steeped in evangelical Protestantism, to the point where people
Yeah.
have argued the Nation of Islam itself, the official Nation of Islam that has not reformed and realigned with Sunni Islam, that that occurred in the 70s, but that Farrakhan leads, is still like more like evangelical Protestantism in its mores and kind of its exoteric affect than it is like Islam, right? So, and he did become a Black American, he did become culturally, he adopted American descendant of slaves as his culture, but he's not. He was raised
Right.
by a white woman, mostly in Hawaii and in Indonesia. He has a half Indonesian sister. His father was from a Luo family that converted from Christianity to Islam. I mean, this is not an American
Even his
descendant of
stepdad,
slaves.
but interestingly, his stepdad was also Muslim. People sometimes
Yeah,
forget that.
the
So both of
Indonesian, yeah.
his yeah, yeah.
The men that, well, I mean, I don't think his father ever raised him, but the men that were in his life, his mother's partners tended to were Muslim, right? Or the
I
one
guess
that
his mom liked
was.
Muslims. I won't hold that against her. Not a
Yeah,
bad
yeah. I mean,
choice.
Shadi's not holding it. Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, I guess what we're getting at here is we are in a secular age, in a secularizing age, and I grew up in a country where people would ask me what my religion. Usually, okay, like, this is how it would go. They would ask me why I worshipped cows. I'd have to kind of explain that
Wait,
Islam is
really?
different than
They would
Hindu.
ask you that?
Well, I mean, look at what I look like.
Yeah, but
So,
when I see you, I think you could be Pakistani, you're
yeah,
from the
but they don't
subcontinent.
know that most Americans know that most brown people are Hindu. They might not know the word, but they know that the Hindus worship cows, so that I'd have to deal with the cow thing. I have to explain
Yeah.
Islam, and then they're like, "Oh, so like you like the Ayatollah Khomeini," and then I have to have another discussion. So, and I was never religious, so the whole thing was kind of a bother. So I'm just like, yeah, it would be great to be in a society where people didn't ask you what your religion was all the time. And now I'm in that society, and I have to say it's really annoying because now they ask me about my politics and other things. You really can't escape this sort of stuff. You just have to figure out a way to channel it and institutionalize it in a way where we can be civilized and kind of participate in the body politic of the society as equals, as citizens and peers, with some level of respect, with some trade-offs. And so I think that's a good segue to your book, the problem of democracy. The subtitle is interesting: America, the Middle East, and the Rise and Fall of an Idea. So the book just came out, I think, October 15th. So it's out.
Yeah.
You guys can find it anywhere they sell books, as they say. But Chadi, I know you from blogging heads in the late aughts, kind of before the Arab Spring. And I believe at the time you were saying maybe Islam and democracy, at least in the Arab world, maybe it just they don't work together well, or liberal democracy. And then we had the Arab Spring, and I think my impression was you were kind of excited. Well, I mean, your family's from Egypt. Egypt had an experiment with democracy, and I think it kind of didn't work. And then you had kind of a liberal turn where a lot of, I don't know, secular Egyptians are more, I don't even know, like liberal, like in terms of their values, became anti-democratic, and it got super confused. And then after 2016, we had this moment in America where, do we have a strong man here? Is this the end of democracy? Is this American fascism? And so your various interests did kind of all mush together. And I think a lot of it has to do with the balance between liberalism, individualism, and a democracy where you have a multiplicity of views, and there's a lot of polarization, which was something that you talked about extensively in the Middle East, where there is a sectarian society. In Egypt, it's not necessarily Copt versus Muslim. It sounds like it's more kind of like, post-socialist Nasserite versus, the Islamic Brotherhood, and, more conventionally pious people. But in the United States, that wasn't an issue, until relatively recently. And now you have MAGA versus the woke, and it's a pretty big gap. It's a pretty big gap. We're living through a lot of cultural polarization. Can you talk about your book? Can you talk about what's going on in the Middle East now? Because I feel like America's kind of forgotten about the Middle East, but hey, we really cared like 10, 12 years ago. I don't know. I mean,
Yeah,
I
look,
remember yeah.
it's been a
Yeah, yeah, go
remarkable
on.
shift. I mean, you're right. So I always I never thought that Islam was incompatible with democracy. My concern was always more whether Islam was compatible with liberal democracy. And for a very long time, I've had a preoccupation with the tension between small d democracy and small l liberalism. So before it was cool to have these debates in the US about post liberalism, we were having these debates in the Middle East because that's where illiberal parties were doing quite well in elections and even winning them for decades. I mean, you go back to the 80s when various Islamist parties throughout the Middle East started to perform quite well in elections that weren't even really free, but there was some space for competition, and these parties started doing well. The Jordanian Muslim Brotherhood is an example. The FIS, Islamic Salvation Front in Algeria, was on the verge of a remarkable victory in 1991, but then the staunchly secular military stepped in, canceled elections, which then triggered a civil war. So these were questions that scholars focused on the Middle East were exploring from the 90s onward. And it's interesting that, you know, during the Arab Spring, I thought these debates were, I don't want to say exceptional to the Middle East, but I didn't really see that they were applicable in America. I thought that, in America, we still have debates about policy questions. I mean, during the Obama years, people still talked about marginal tax rates, deficit spending, the budget, universal health care, and getting into, specific policy minutia on what healthcare legislation looks like. And it's really remarkable how the Arab Spring provided a kind of preview of the sorts of divides that we would have in America if you just fast forward 5 or 6 years. So when Donald Trump comes, he introduces, and it's not that he just introduced it on his own. I mean, the kindling for the fire was already there, and someone lit the fire, and that person was Donald Trump. And we shifted from a country that was still to some extent policy oriented. I don't want to exaggerate this, but it was more policy oriented. Now, when people think about who they're going to vote for, they're thinking more about culture, identity, and religion. And I call these the who we are question. So it's not like what works in government or what government does, it's who we are. So every election becomes existential because what's at stake is what it means to be American, the nature of the founding, the future of the republic, whether democracy survives. And obviously, it's a lot harder to compromise on what are basically existential. How do you split the middle on culture and identity? It's harder. It's harder to do that than say splitting the middle on marginal tax rates. So I think that it's been striking to me how my different interests have converged in a way that I didn't fully anticipate. And this is, to me, is the fundamental question. This is the problem of democracy, which is, what do we do when democracy produces bad outcomes? And I would put bad in scare quotes. Like, what is a bad outcome? We as Americans no longer even agree on how to judge whether an election outcome is bad or good because we have no common baseline. And that it was very much the case in the Middle East, that it becomes very subjective. Not to say that I'm a moral relativist or a cultural relativist, because I do have strong opinions of my own about the way things should be. I just have lost hope that there's any way to come to a common understanding of the way things should be. And therefore, we as Americans have to accommodate ourselves to this new reality where there isn't going to be something called a common good. We're not going to be able to reach consensus. There is no such thing as unity. We as Americans are never again, at least in our lifetimes, I think, going to agree on what it means to be American. So instead of resisting that reality, I would rather us come to terms with this, even if we don't like it.
Well, so how does we don't have a strong man. A lot of these societies where liberal democracy breaks down, the military takes over. I don't see that happening in the U.S. I don't think the American military wants to do that. It doesn't have the same cohesive culture that a lot of
Yeah.
militaries, in the world. There's a barracks culture, a separation from society in a lot of these countries, just for various historical reasons. The United States never happened, and it hasn't occurred. So, I mean, what's the future in your view of American democracy? Because just to be clear, there were issues I remember with Algeria where they were worried that the Islamist Party would come into power and never do another election again. Like, these are just the constant worries about illiberal democracy, and the exact same worries. I don't know how sincere they were, but the resistance left were saying the exact same thing after the election of Trump and up until 2020, in terms of they were worried that basically uh, they could never have a normal election again. And then after Trump was, he lost. There's a faction that he supports, that he is encouraging, that's now saying he never lost. And so now we're having an argument about mechanics, about just the very, very like logistics of elections that, in my lifetime, that's just even 2000 with Gore versus Bush. It was never anything.
Yeah.
It never got fundamentally to the root of the issue. It was still more technical. It was technical arguments about hanging chads and things like that. Now we're actually like questioning whether we can really have a democracy with each state independently doing the electoral college and all these things. It's really, really thorough and deep now.
Yeah. So and this is one way that I think the U.S. is quite different than Middle Eastern cases, in the sense that I'm actually quite bullish on American democracy. I don't think there is any risk, or was any risk, of something resembling a military coup. And some people have criticized me for being complacent when it comes to American democracy, but I suppose I do have an abiding faith, in part because of our institutions, but also because America is a really big country. And I think it's very hard to overthrow the government, considering, in light of the kind of institutional setup that we have. And this is always what I would push people on. Like in the lead up to the midterms, I found the alarmism and catastrophism to be at such a high pitch. And I was very critical of that. Some people really hated me for that. And we'll talk more about that, I think, in a bit. But I don't want to be self-serving about it, because but yeah, I mean, the midterms didn't lead to the end of the world. I'm comfortable saying that the catastrophists were wrong, and I think that we fell for their rhetoric. We took their rhetoric seriously because a lot of important people were using this rhetoric, including President Biden, who gave not just one but two major speeches about the survival of American democracy in the months and weeks leading up to the midterms. So this was a serious thing, that people were actually talking about American democracy dying. And there's been a whole cottage industry built around this particular fear. And I just think it's absurd. And I almost feel like I shouldn't even talk much about it, because that's taking it more seriously than it ever deserved to be taken, but even there's some terms that were introduced into American lexicon which I'd never heard in the American context until just the last few months. So you alluded to Algeria, this fear that if Islamist parties came to power, they would, through free elections, that then they would use democracy to end it, that they would immediately end democracy once they were able to taste power and all this. So that's called one person, one vote, one time. And I'm like, wait a second. I'm now actually hearing this phrase being used in relation to American politics. This is a direct Middle Eastern import. But you know what another Middle Eastern import is? The term deep state. This time it was Republicans who popularized this after Trump was elected. And, it's interesting that the fact that these concepts travel, and sometimes people aren't even aware of where they come from. So I presume that Donald Trump is not aware of the history of the Turkish deep state. And he doesn't need to be for the term to have a kind of resonance. And now it is part of the American lexicon. So in some sense, a lot of these bigger concerns, these problems of democracy, so to speak, have become universalized. They're no longer cordoned off to one region or one culture or one religion. Most large democracies are asking similar questions. Obviously, they're different in their details. So the primary cleavage in American politics is not religious or religiously or ideologically religious as it was in Egypt or Tunisia, where the primary divide was between Islamists on one hand and non-Islamists on the other. And the fundamental question there was, what is the appropriate role for Islam in public life? And what is the appropriate relationship between Islam and the state? I mean, we are starting to ask some of those questions with the rise of so-called Christian nationalism. But it's much more of a minority interest. It's very influential intellectually on the part of the Catholic integralists and other and evangelical intellectuals, but it's not necessarily like the mainstream of the Republican Party. But but religion is an issue in the US insofar as our two parties are very much polarized around religion. So if someone says that if someone is white and outwardly and openly Christian, you can generally guess that they're more likely to be Republican. So we are seeing how some of these cleavages are overlaying on top of partisan cleavages. But then
Yeah.
culture and identity and gender politics, I mean, all these things are really cultural divides. And and you go to, India, cultural and ideological divides around the role of Hinduism in public life. And you see that manifested in discussions around beef bans, for example. But the rise of the far right in Italy, in Sweden, Bolsonaro in Brazil. I mean, thankfully he lost, but this isn't the end of what Bolsonaro represents. The most right wing government in Israeli history was just elected recently. So clearly something is going on here where the fundamental divides are no longer primarily economic. There is culture war everywhere.
It's a global culture war.
Yeah, in a way it is. Yeah.
And like,
I mean,
why do you
thankfully the
think? Why
woke
do you?
stuff hasn't I mean, I was going to say thankfully the woke stuff hasn't necessarily gained too much ground in on the European continent, although we'll see if that changes. Although that said, I was just in France recently and I was reflecting on this and I thought to myself, after spending a week in France, I did think to myself, wokeness has its positives. Like France is racist in a way that Americans can't even imagine. France is anti-Muslim in a way that Americans probably can't relate to. And it's actually in part wokeness that has conditioned American elites to be respectful of Islam and Muslims, but also to be respectful of minorities. They do it in patronizing ways and they go overboard. But at the end of the day, there's some good things about it. But that's only after I'm in France. So I'm sure that like
Mhm.
the more time that passes, I'll get back to feeling like wokeness is like actually dangerous in America. Well, it is, but
Well, I mean, I think that this predates wokeness. I mean, because people always have said this, and I experienced this myself. Interpersonal racism is much more salient in Europe than it is in the United States. And I grew up in the United States, like you, and it's just there's just certain things that are socially acceptable in Europe that would like just not fly in the United States, no matter what your ideology. Like maybe if you were in like northern Idaho, I don't know, but you know what I'm saying, like denial of
yeah.
service, people like insulting you to your face, and just like weird
But the
looks
difference
and
about
whatnot.
the difference about Idaho though is that if you're in Boise, if you're in like the city, if you're in urban center, you'll find basically the same sorts of highly educated liberal elites wherever you go in America. So it's less an issue of being in Idaho and more of an issue, are you in some random rural area? But there's a kind of conformity of liberal
Yeah,
culture that you find all across America. And it's actually remarkably predictable wherever you go. And maybe that's part of the conformity that you were pointing to earlier. Like, is that a good thing? Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Well, okay, like let's change tack as we close out because we kind of like alluded to wokeness and conformity. I've joked around with you about this, and you seem a little surprised. Um, you know, so you've been on the scene. As a public intellectual, I'll call you that. I mean, if you're Brookings, you're a public intellectual. You're Dr. Hamid. Like I know you have a PhD, but you're a public
Yep.
intellectual,
I do. Yeah.
and this isn't. It's just not a like there's some academic where it's like, oh, you kind of get dragged into it. But you've been in the public square, and I remember you talking during the Arab Spring and about the Middle East and all this stuff, and trying to explain the Islamic Brotherhood and what's going on in Egypt. But with the wisdom of the crowds, with Demir, you kind of becoming more and more America focused, or America is becoming more like the Middle East, whatever, as you said, right? But you are a Democrat. I think you're liberal. Yet I've been noticing, I mean, a tendency to kind of dismiss you, and just be like contemptuous of you as if you're not with the program, you're not part of the tribe or whatever. And these are mostly from liberals, progressives. I follow a lot of different types of people on Twitter. I probably follow as many liberals as I do conservatives just because I follow a lot of scientists. And so, people will like, there'll be quote tweets that come into dunks, or like, they think it's dunks that'll come into my timeline. And I guess my question to you is like, what's going, I mean, like, what happened to you? Like, did you change, or did the world change around you and you refused to change? Just like talk about this a little.
Yeah, yeah, it's an interesting question, and it's gotten worse over time. And I was actually somewhat surprised when you told me that you see a bunch of people from science Twitter, dunking on me and so forth. And sometimes I have too many. I mean, not to say that. I mean, sometimes I just have too many notifications on Twitter that I can't follow like all the people who hate me. It's just hard to keep track of, and I've also changed my settings so I don't see a lot of people who I maybe don't find particularly constructive in their criticisms. But yeah, I mean, someone said that they called it, Shadi Hamid derangement syndrome, and compared it to how people sometimes feel about Liz Brunig or Barry Weiss or Thomas Chatterton Williams. I don't know. I feel like I'm quite a bit different than they are. So it's still a bit of a mystery to me because, I am more academically oriented. Um, I do have an academic background. I'm not a journalist. I'm not a, I mean, I guess I'm a commentator, but I'm not primarily just a commentator. So I don't know. I don't know. I'm trying to get my head around it because I see some people like I found out that there's this guy. His name is John Gantz, I guess. Well, no, I didn't. I'm almost
Yeah,
certain
yeah.
that's his name, but it's confusing because his handle is Lionel Trilling. But anyway,
Yes.
so I found out about this guy, and he's become obsessed with me, and he wrote two posts back to back in a very short period of time a couple months ago, where it was just about me, and even my name was in the title, and I'm just like, what is going on with these people? Like, I actually find it somewhat flattering because I'm living in their minds rent free. And I like that I bother them because I mean, there's something wrong with these people because there's no one that I can think of on Twitter or on Substack or a writer that I'm just constantly thinking, oh, I'm going to follow this person just so I can find a new way to dunk on them or attack them or quote tweet so that my followers feel morally superior. And that impulse is one that I don't fully relate to because it never really occurs to me to do that, and not to be self-serving and say that I'm great or whatever. I have my faults, and I sometimes lose my cool, and that happens. But there is a certain kind of online personality that lives for the dunk and has a kind of personal attachment to particular main characters on Twitter. They want to make you into a main character, and then you're the one who like bears the brunt. And I guess like I've become attuned, I've adapted myself to it, and in some ways I feel like it gives me a kind of weird pleasure because it means that I like the idea that these people can't even process me. And I don't know. I think that's part of it. I guess my best read on it is that it's because part of it is I'm brown, part of it is I'm Muslim, I'm a minority, a person of color. I am at a left, what's perceived as a left of center establishment think tank. So the fact that I'm saying this, but I'm also at Brookings, I think just really bothers people. They're like, wait, he shouldn't say these things if he is at Brookings. Like if he was, I don't know, like pick some kind of right wing institution or
AI.
suppose AI, yeah, or a heterodox kind of media outlet. I write for the Atlantic on a regular basis, and the fact that I'm mainstream and they see me quote unquote getting away with these bad ideas and not being willing to read the room, I think is probably part of what angers them. They don't think that I should be doing this, and they think that I should be respecting my identity, that if I was a good person of color, a good minority, a good Democrat, a good liberal, I would just get with the program. And you're right. I've never voted, to my knowledge, I think. Yeah, I don't think it's ever happened. Yeah, I've never voted for a Republican. I've only voted for Democrats. Am I a liberal in the American sense? Yeah, I think I've always seen myself as vaguely left of center, liberal left, whatever you want to call that. That said, and this is maybe this is a bit of a longer thing, but I do wonder, like, when I'm going to reach my breaking point where I'm just going to be like, I can't fucking vote for the Democrat in this particular local election because they just suck so much, and I'll have to abstain. I mean, I don't really feel comfortable voting for Republicans, so I don't think I do that. But at some point, especially, I don't, have to be careful how I say this. But if I think about, if I had, I do think about, like, if I had kids, and I do want to have kids at some point, and I had them and they were going to public school in Virginia or Maryland, and they came back and said, like, daddy, mommy, and they told me some of the things that my parent friends tell me their kids are hearing and learning in public school, that like that's where I draw the line. Like, I can't, at some point you have to say, I can't do this and I can't be on board with this.
Yeah. Just a quick side note on that. I am a parent, and it's just interesting. Sometimes I engage on social media, and some of the stuff that Fox News, just to be entirely candid, some of the stuff that they report about the schools is actually 100% correct. Because I know this because I've experienced things, and I don't want to talk about stuff publicly, partly because I'm public as far I'm already public enough. I don't want to get my kids wrapped up in stuff,
Yeah.
but I've discussed this with people, academic friends who don't have children, and they'll repeat MSNBC talking points that, oh, well, that's actually all made up. It's not true. And I'm like, I don't care what you say. I actually have experienced this, so I don't really care what you say, And they're just kind of taken aback because I guess they don't encounter people with kids. I don't know, but it's just interesting because there are things that are happening, and you can deny it all you want, but if people have an experience, they don't care what you say. They don't care how good your argument is. They don't care how many people you cite, what experts you talk to, And I think that is a disconnect that is happening. Back to John Gans. I don't know much about this person. I only see this person when they get obsessed with someone, like they get obsessed, like he got obsessed with you. Apparently,
Yeah.
his niche seems to be, I don't know. He's a professional cop, professional intellectual cop of some sort,
Yeah.
of which there's a whole genre out there, and I think we can chalk some of it down to envy. You have, as they call it now, a platform, and they think they should have that platform. So maybe we can make an almost Marxist analysis here, where they want the job you have, and by God, they'll figure out a way to dunk their way to it. Now, that's not actually, as you don't get into the Atlantic by spicy dunks. You actually have to write books or have opinions and write articles and have some novel thoughts that are not found 27,000 times in your timeline a day. And I think that's one of the
Yeah.
fundamental problems that I have. And this is when I say that you show up in my timeline. Um, sometimes and quite often they're academics or scientists, and this is not their specialty, but you say something about political science or politics, and it's understood and known that this is false, and it's shockingly hilariously false. And the fact that you get a platform at the Atlantic is also funny. So a lot of it is almost like passed off as you are an object of humor. They're making fun of you. You're like the smelly kid in middle school. A lot of it is very infantile, actually. But I wanted to talk to you about it just because it's just a weird place that we are in America. That social media is so interesting in terms of bringing it's surfacing all these links and articles and facts, and then it also brings out this very juvenile tendency in our cultural, like, let's call it the cultural elite, whatever you want to call it. And sometimes you're part of it. I mean, I became I sometimes I said something flip about the 1905 revolution, And I wasn't actually talking about the 1905 revolution in Russia, which was like kind of like a precursor revolution, whatever. And I remember like it became huge, and people like the hardcore, not the hardcore history guy, but the other guy, revolutions guy, kind of like dunk tweeted on me. And it was all like fine, but it was also just like contentless, and it was just kind of sad to see, um, you know, okay, so let me just tell you something, and this is something that I think sets you apart from a lot of people. So Mike Duncan, I like his work. I hope I mean, whatever. I don't care if this gets back to him. He was on Noah Smith's podcast, and he talked about how he just wouldn't go on the Rogan show because he didn't want to deal with that stuff. And I was like, okay, I mean that's fine. Like, there's a lot of weird stuff on the Rogan show, although it would, get your name out to a lot of people who maybe
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes it's good to expose people to who you are if they're outside of your audience, right? And I googled it out of curiosity. He did go on Chapo Trap House though, and I'm bringing this up because Chapo Trap House, like, they have some views that are pretty shocking sometimes to like mainstream Americans. A lot of them are, pretty pro-communist, like literally. Um, but he was okay going there, and I think that's because in his in group, um, Chapo Trap House is cool. Rogan is outside the pale, and that's just sad. It's a sad. I mean, I didn't want to know that about him, to be honest. He was also
Yeah.
explaining to Noah Smith how, from what I could tell, liberals, they use history correctly, while conservatives don't use history correctly. That's just how it works out, So I was like, okay, like I didn't want to know this about Mike Duncan anyway, because I like his podcast,
Yeah.
but he's obviously, in my opinion, that's a very boring opinion to have. Your side always uses history correctly. Is that true? Because Noah was bringing, I mean, Noah's liberal himself, but he was just bringing the historian here argument, where I know enough history where I've seen historians basically subordinating their scholarship to ideology, right? Where it's like,
Yeah. So
you can make a lawyerly argument, but like, do you really want to do that?
yeah, and I think that this is something that is noticeable to me over the past, certainly 5 years, which is a dumbing down of left of center liberal America. They used to be the ones who thought that they were like this idea that the truth has a liberal bias, and it was like half joking when people used to say that. Now they really do believe it, but they're so confident, and they think the other side is so bad that they're not used to actually contending with real substantive challenges. So when I get attacked, oftentimes people are just like, you're dumb or you're wrong. They can't even muster an intellectual challenge because they don't actually know how to do that. And they don't even see a need to do that because for them, history ended. All the big questions have been answered. And it's just a question of people being rightly educated and rightly informed. And then, and once that happens, then maybe they can see the truth. And that's why I'm very much a critic of the whole disinformation racket, which is basically a way of saying that people people are wrong and we have to enlighten them, and it's us elites who decide what this enlightenment looks like, and we have to guide them upon the straight path. It's almost religious in a way. And
Yeah.
it doesn't occur to these disinformation specialists that the reason people disagree with them might be because of first principles. It might be because of foundational philosophical differences about the nature of the good life. And I'm very much a believer that actually most of the divides we have are actually legitimate. They are about real differences. Oftentimes Americans don't know how to express them in philosophical terms. I mean, why should they? It's, oftentimes instinctual or visceral for people. They know, they feel that something is right. They know that something is right. And this goes back to your point about the gaslighting tendencies of left of center elite America, which is you've experienced something in your own life. It's you believe it because you've seen it with your own eyes, like crime, for example. And then they tell you no, crime is actually down, or crime is a figment of your imagination, or the science says that crime isn't as big a deal as you think it is. What they are doing is gaslighting you. When they say that what you heard, Fox makes things up, but as you said, sometimes Fox does report correctly on the kind of crazy shit that's being taught at schools. That we don't have to go into details on what that consists of, but I think listeners will know. And they're telling you that, oh, actually, that's not real. But then friends who literally have a kid who experienced this directly in the
Yeah.
curriculum, or a teacher told them this directly, or so they're telling us it's really disorienting, and I think we have to fight back, because being gaslit is not a good feeling, and it can make you feel like something is wrong in the universe, and we have to remind ourselves that these people are a small minority. They don't represent America. And I find it remarkable how almost every single private dinner or social gathering in very liberal Washington, D.C., or when I go to Boston, New York, when I'm speaking on panels at universities, privately after the panel, everyone will acknowledge that the wokeness is out of control, and that it's stifling, and that it's dangerous to intellectual inquiry. And it's to the point where it's actually hard to find people who defend the hyper wokeness. So part of the issue here is that this survives, but it doesn't actually have true ideological defenders. But everyone feels that they have to be so careful about what they say, so these bad ideas end up still holding sway. And so there's a kind of disproportionality. And once we realize that, we can fight back, because there is strength in numbers. And especially among brown people. I mean, there is a brown rebellion. It's brown folks who are at the forefront of pushing back against this nonsense that we're seeing, because, a lot of us love America. To be quite honest, it's the white liberals who are a bit more of the problem here, because a lot of them either don't love America, or don't know, or don't feel it's appropriate to say that they love America. I can't tell you the number of times where I've gone on, I've with friends or people I've just met, or at parties, and I'm saying about like how much this country means to me and what it meant for my parents. And like, it is like, love isn't even really hyperbole here. And they're like, whoa, I haven't heard that before. And I'm like, have you not been around immigrants? Have you not been around brown people? Like, I mean, there's a reason that we live here. There's a reason that our parents came here. There's a reason that our parents
Yeah.
fell in love with this country.
Yeah, no, I mean that's okay. So we got to close out here, but I think that's a good note to end on. I do have to say, I'll edit this out, but Shadi, you're not supposed to tell them about the Brown Rebellion. I mean,
Yeah.
like that's all. That's at the right time and at the right place. Okay, so gotta edit this part out. But aside from that, I think everything else
I
was
can't tell.
really
Wait, are you joking about that, or you do want to keep the Brown Rebellion secret? I mean, I feel like people are talking about it, like especially when it comes to Hispanics, but also just more broadly. I've certainly tweeted about it
you mean
myself.
multiracial whites. Multiracial whites is the term for them. So.
Okay.
Okay, so
Okay.
I will end with this because it's a real story. I went to a Christmas party and I met this guy. I'm in the tech space. I met this guy. He just came back to the United States from living in Asia for 8 years. And he comes up to me and like we're just talking. He's like, "Bro, I don't know what's going on here. Like, what is Latinx? Like, this wasn't a thing when I left in 2014, And then he was also like, I was also told by a friend of mine that in the Department of Education, do not consider Indian people non-white. And I was like, oh yeah, because we're white adjacent. He's like, wait, what the hell is that? And I was like, oh, and it's just like there's all the it's like our language has been colonized by all these weird concepts that are totally exotic to someone from 2014. Because
Yeah.
he lived mostly. I mean, I will just say it. He lived in Indonesia. He lived mostly, around them and worked at a tech company there. And so he comes here and he's having to like refamiliarize him. And he's like, he was like basically like a moderate Democrat. And he's like, wait, am I right wing now? Like, I mean, am I problematic? Like, what is going on? Like, he didn't. use the word problematic because he doesn't have our language. But so I mean, the cultures shift, they change. This is a time of the year, I think, to be positive and happy and be thankful for things. So yeah, I'm thankful to be in America. There's a reason I'm still here. There's a reason my family came here. There's a reason you're here. We know what the alternatives are, and they ain't great. We live in a world where there's no utopia. And America's not perfect, but I appreciate what we have here. I appreciate the ability to talk, to speak to you, Shadi, to meet people from all walks of life, to express our views, to express, to have free speech, to have the right of assembly, like all these things that we still have. And, I don't really care who dunks on me. That's their right as well. They can dunk on us all they want, but we're still here. We're still expressing our opinion. And with that, I think, it was great talking to you, Shadi. You have a Merry Christmas. Congratulations on your book. I hope you and Demir keep doing your thing. It's a great podcast. People should check it out. You guys do essays as well. So again, the book is A Problem of Democracy, America, the Middle East, the Rise and Fall of an Idea. And it's been great talking to you, Shadi, and I will talk to you again soon.
Yeah, Razib, thanks so much for having me. Really enjoyed the conversation as always. And Merry
Indeed,
Christmas.
Yeah, Merry Christmas to you. Yeah.
This podcast for kids. This is my favorite